I invite Dr. Diane Turab Nkosi, Chair of the UWI Guardian Group Premium Open Lecture, to the stage.
All protocol duly observed by the previous speakers. I would like to wish you all a very warm welcome and a pleasant good evening. Before I introduce the featured speaker, I just want to acknowledge 3 persons in the audience who, without these persons, we would not have maintained this event. So I'd like for us to acknowledge Dr. Betty Ann Roller, who as former coordinator of the Instructional Development Unit, initiated the relationship between the UE and the Guardian Group. Dr. Roller. I would also like to acknowledge our former director, Dr. Anna Mae Edwards-Henry, who maintained this as a very significant part of the St. Augustine campus's calendar, Dr. Edwards-Henry. And Professor Margaret Rouse-Jones, who is with us, was our chairperson and a very hardworking member of the committee for all these years. So I'd like to acknowledge her as well. Thank you. And so I'm going to introduce to you all another strong woman, and that's Professor Elizabeth Barkley, who I'm sure you all have read the program and you can see all her accomplishments. She has published several books on student engagement. She has designed an online course that has won awards. And this is a course in music history, and it's a foundation course. And as those of you on this campus who know about foundation courses and the size of these courses would understand how difficult it is to engage students in a foundation course. And she won an award for an online foundation course in music history. She has interrogated the meaning of student engagement in order to develop a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of what engagement is. To more effectively promote it in her students, she has spent more than 4 decades, and when you look at her, you wouldn't guess that, but she has spent more than 4 decades in higher education. She has worked as a dean, and she has struggled with some of the same issues that we here on this campus struggle with. And she has written about these issues, and she's going to be here today to share them with us. And she's still in the trenches working as a lecturer, as a professor. And so here to share her decades of experience with us, I am very pleased and honored to invite to the stage Professor Elizabeth Barkley.
Let's see, you can hear me, the amazing miracle of amplification. I am so delighted to be here with you tonight. This is my first trip to Trinidad, and I've been so impressed with the graciousness of the people, the beauty of your country, and even your wonderful anthem. I thought, that's so beautiful. I love your national anthem. I won't repeat the long list of people who I, of course, should also thank, because clearly I will forget someone, and many of you have already enumerated the various people who have been involved. But I would like to say to all of you and all of the people on the organizing committee, as well as the representatives from Guardian and from the university, thank you for this privilege to be here with you tonight. Now, Diane made one small mathematical error. She said that I was over 40 years in education. I am just slightly under 40 years in education, 39, so I don't want to be prematurely aged, although I do appreciate so much your very lovely introduction. But I wanted to provide you with a little bit of context. So I have been in higher education for 39 years, working at the college, and during that time, I was 10 years as a dean, and I loved being a dean. But then, for personal reasons, I asked to return to the faculty. And I wanted to share with you a picture of my classroom the first day that I came back to teach. Some of you may recognize a little bit of the sense, but despite that look, I plowed through with energy on my planned curriculum to engage them in a stimulating discussion on the structural nuances of a Beethoven symphony. Now, excuse me, but their musical heroes at the time were Tupac and Nine Inch Nails. They could care less about Beethoven. And I'm sure that if they had had a remote, they would have changed the channel. But it got worse. Within about 2 weeks into my new glorious return to teaching, I was called into the office of the new dean, the dean that I had helped hire, as I listened to him read through a long list of complaints from some particularly unhappy students. I was too young to retire, so I decided I had to look at what I was doing at a very basic level. Years later, I met a man who is a very prominent speaker on student education and on engagement in the United States. Now, this isn't really him, but I have to protect his anonymity. So I picked a picture that kind of looked like his personality. And yes, so anyway, I, of course, appreciated the fact that he had all sorts of comments about how I should engage my students. But the problem that I had was that he hadn't actually been back in a classroom for 35 years. And so I told him, you know, you'd have a little more authority if you spent a little bit of time in one of today's classrooms. He took my advice. One of the only people I ever know who ever did that. But he did take my advice, and he got a part-time adjunct position at a local university. He spent 6 months preparing for his return to teaching. And I know in his heart of hearts, he was so persuaded that he was going to be such a dynamic success. I don't know if you have this, but in our country, we do. We have something called Rate My Professor, which is an anonymous way for students to comment about their professors. I think he was sure that it was going to be so good that his students would race to rate my professors, and they'd have to come up with a new category to capture his hotness, like a smoking chili pepper. So I was very intrigued when, a few weeks after his return to teaching, he sent me an email. And the title of the email was, "Read it, weep." And so I wanted to share with you just a little bit of his email. Teaching? Why does anyone try? My semester has been hugely disappointing. I went into it believing that students would feel my enthusiasm, respect my intelligence, and want to share both. Individual students, don't get me started, as it is likely to reveal in me strong emotional forces tempting me into using my gifts for language in the service of a pettiness destined to erode the moral character I've spent a lifetime to build up. I feel like a total failure and doubt I will ever teach again. Now, I'm looking at you. You're nice people. You're kind of smiling. Some of you are thinking, "Aw, poor guy." You know what I thought? Yes. After I had revitalized or changed my teaching, I won an award, and I was walking with an historian who was from the Carnegie Foundation, who also teaches a history course at a university in the Midwest. And he said to me one day, he said, "You know, Elizabeth, sometimes I feel like a partner in an unholy alliance. I pretend to teach, and my students pretend to learn." And I said to him, "You know, you've only got it half right. When I returned to teaching, those students weren't even." So that sounds like we are student bashing. But when you think of the amount of stimulation they get from media and from technology. Cognitive psychologists have determined that their brains actually have been rewired. They are different. And when they come into our classes, where we very methodically often present our information in linear ways, some of them are quite bored and disinterested. Some, however, are lost and overwhelmed. And the look on their faces, whether they're lost and overwhelmed or whether they're bored and disinterested, is the same. Teaching today is very tough. And one of the things that so amazes me is how universal it is. It doesn't matter if I'm in Japan or in Colombia or at medical universities in the United States. Faculty are struggling with engaging their students. So we want our students to be engaged. But how do we accomplish that? I was actually asked to write a book on student engagement after I had won all of these awards. And I realized that the term was being used all over the place, but no one had really defined it in a way that I felt was useful for me in the classroom. And if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? So I decided one of the first things that I was going to deal with is to try to define what is student engagement. Now, if we stay later and we have a chance to talk over a cocktail, I'll give you a little bit more of the back history on this, but I will tell you one thing I knew in my heart as a teacher and as a human being: it's not about entertainment. I thought there is no way that we as college professors can compete with the kind of production values that are out now there in the media. We can't entertain them, and we shouldn't be trying to entertain them. It's also not about technology and fancy bells and whistles. I don't know about here, but in the United States, new things come along and everybody thinks that's what's going to solve all of our problems. That's what's going to engage all of our students. And what we find time and time again is that these fancy bells or whistles are just as apt to confuse students as it is to maybe interest or intrigue them. So I eventually came up with a theoretical model that helped me look at engagement by suggesting that it was the synergistic interaction of two components. One is motivation, but the other is active learning. And I will say this just to share with you a bit of a backstory. When I first went into all of this, I thought it was only motivation. But I was working with one of the most established premier faculty experts in education of the 20th century. And her name is, as I told the people on Wednesday, K. Patricia Cross. And I say, what does student engagement mean to you, Pat? And she said, student engagement is about a student moving to higher levels of cognitive functioning. They have to be thinking better. They have to be thinking critically. That's student engagement. And as I told the people on Wednesday, I said to her, to take the earbuds out of their ears first. And she'd say, I give you this much for motivation, this much for motivation. And finally I told her, I said, Pat, your concept of motivation comes from the fact that your whole teaching career has been in graduate programs at Harvard and at Berkeley. By definition, those students are already engaged. I'm teaching in an open admissions college where we take only the top 100%. And those students have to learn to care first. So, if motivation is one component, what does that mean? Jerry Brophy at the University of Michigan defines motivation with students as the enthusiasm and the degree to which they invest attention and effort in their learning. Now, motivation has been studied for many, many, many decades. And one of the earliest is the behaviorist model, where if you want a type of behavior to continue, you reward it. If you want it to stop, you either provide some disincentives or punish it, or you ignore it. I know that that's a simplistic description of a very complex theoretical model. However, that model has permeated education in the United States, and I dare say in most places in the world. We reward with good grades, we punish with penalties, with poor grades, and what can happen, though, is that students end up losing their focus on learning. All they want is the carrots, and they want to avoid the sticks. I have faculty tell me from all sorts of institutions, whatever happened to students' curiosity? Why don't they come in with some innate interest in learning? And I would propose part of it is that they are a product of our decades of a behaviorist-based educational system. Now, there's other models of motivation. You're probably also all very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, where in order to move up this pyramid, you have to deal with more basic needs first. And we know that. If a student comes into our classes starved or exhausted because they worked or partied all night, they're not going to be able to function at the level that we call engagement. Many, many models of motivation, but many contemporary motivation theorists say that they all can be described as the product of value and expectancy. A product rather than a sum, because you can't not have one of these two components, and it's value and it's expectancy. So let's look at value first. The theorist suggests that unless you value something, you can't be motivated to do it. And so those of us who are college professors, somewhere along the line, became drawn to our disciplines because we found them so fascinating. So it's really disheartening when our students are looking at the watch, and as soon as it's time to go, they burst out of the classroom as though they've just been released from prison. I had a faculty member tell me a few weeks ago, she says, why for my students is the best class a canceled class? What's wrong with that picture? If you actually survey students, and I have, many of them will say, when I ask, why are you in my class? They say, because I'm checking off a general education pattern requirement, because it's in my degree, it's because of this, it's because of that. They rarely say, because I really wanted to learn what you've got to teach me, Dr. Barkley. It's another one of these reasons. So they're looking at our courses as though those courses are stepping stones towards what they really want, or they are obstacles. Now, this is not, new. When I was still at the university, I used to get a kick out of these curriculum sheets, and at the top, they would always say, you take these courses, and these courses will prepare you for a career in music. And I remember my little snarky, rebellious part always wanted to put an asterisk there and say, these courses will prepare you for a career in music, of which there are none, because I don't see that there's any careers in classical music. Or I'd want to say, these courses will prepare you for a career in music in the 19th century, because everything you're teaching me is so out of date. So helping students find value in what they're learning is not completely, a new problem. But I want to give you one example in my own courses. I was teaching, as you know, traditional classical music history. I don't know if you know this composer, but that's Johannes Brahms. And one day I was looking at him and I thought, from the perspective of my students, who are extremely diverse, he looks like a fat, old, bearded white guy. Now, it's not that they have anything against that old bearded white guy, and I don't think I'm insulting anyone